So I believe we can start the meeting. So afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee of Sedgemoor District Council. I'm Brian Smedley. I'm chairing the meeting today. Just hand back to the committee manager.
Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully those present will be able to see and hear the meeting. However, in the event of a technical failure, the Chairman will adjourn the meeting and set a new time for its reinstatement. Please note that the meeting is being recorded and a copy of that recording will be available on the Council's committee web pages within the next few days. All members of the committee should have their camera on, but should remain muted until invited to speak. And if you wish to attract the Chairman's attention, please make use of the instant messaging function if possible. And the format of the meeting will be as per the agenda published. Thank you. Back to you, Chairman.
Okay, now what is customary to do now is to go around the committee to find out if everybody can see and hear the meeting. So I'm going to go round the councillors one by one, starting with Councillor Lilly.
Good afternoon, Brian. Yes, I can see and hear everybody. Thank you.
Do we have Councillor Sue Barber? Do we know?
Doesn't look like it, Chairman.
Nope. Then Councillor Ian Dyer?
No.
Councillor Bob Filmer?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm here and I can see and hear everyone else in the room.
Councillor Alistair Hendry?
Councillor Hendry sends his apologies.
Okay. Councillor Kathy Pearce?
Yep, good afternoon. I confirm I can hear and see everyone. Thank you.
Councillor Bill Revens?
Good afternoon, Councillor Smedley. Yeah, confirming I can see and hear everything. Thank you.
That's the list of councillors I have in front of me. The others must therefore be apologies, which we'll move on to in a minute. Therefore, officers that are here at the start is Rose Stokes.
Hello, I'm Rose Stokes, the Scrutiny Officer, and I can confirm I can see and hear everything. Thank you.
Steve Taylor, who we've been hearing from, so it would be a surprise now if he couldn't hear and see everything.
I can see and hear you, Chairman.
Brilliant. And Nick Tate.
Hi, yes, I can see and hear everything. Thank you.
Now, I am aware that there's other officers and speakers here, but they're not on my list, so I'll assume that they'll hear and see when they're going to speak and then speak and hear as necessary. So back on to the meeting directly, and the first item of the is apologies for absence. So,
yes, Chairman, we've got apologies from Councillors Cordiner, Grimes, Hendry and Finneran.
Okay, so the minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. Are people happy with that? That I can, at the next given opportunity, sign that as a correct record?
With one slight amendment, Chairman, if I may.
What's that?
On the meeting, we have apologies from Councillor Sue Barber, and I also have inadvertently put Sue Barber as being in attendance, so I'll remove Sue Barber.
So that will certainly be resolved as you've just described. Everybody with that amendment happy with that one? I saw Councillor Lilly indicate that's the case. I see nobody saying that's not a good idea, so we'll assume that's a good idea, and therefore I'll sign those next time I have the chance. Is there any urgent business? I think not.
No, Chairman.
No. And in terms of public speaking time?
No members of the public have registered to speak.
Pretty sure there are no members of the public anywhere. And declarations of interest we're looking at now. Who'd like to declare something interesting? Councillor Pearce.
I need to declare declarations of personal interest on items 6 and 7. I'm a member of Friends of the Meads, which is mentioned in agenda item 6, and I'm a member of the Homes in Sedgemoor board. Okay.
Anybody else want to declare anything? Nope. Other declarations are probably standing ones. And in which case, let's move straight into the first item on the agenda, which is item 6, which is the community infrastructure levy. I'm guessing we've got Mr. Tate here to talk us through that one. People will have seen the content already submitted. So let's go straight over to Mr. Tate first for any presentation he wishes to make.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. What I will do is just on the first question, because I've got some slightly updated figures for SIL. They do only, the good news is they go up, but just in terms of the total amount that we've received, it's £3,723,000, but we still ring fence 20% of that for Bridgewater Tidal Barrier. Our 5% for which is set aside for admin costs currently equates to £186,000, and I'll come on to talk about suggestions for that in a moment. And the meaningful proportion passed on to town and parish councils is now 439,000. What that we pay it out in I think it's quarterly, so that's why it tends to jump up in quite big steps. But it does mean that there's sort of about £2.3 million of SIL, which is currently unallocated and potentially available for items of infrastructure on our infrastructure priority list. Just as a further sort of update before I put a couple of slides up looking at some of our emerging ideas around governance. There's a question about SIL in terms of how it moves forward under the unitary option. I mean, what I can confirm is it is included currently in two work streams, which are looking at how services and functions will migrate into the new council. So certainly under it is included under one of the planning work streams, and I'm also working on an infrastructure work stream. So again, quite a big crossover with SIL and how it will migrate over, but it is, as I mentioned in the answer, because it's very regulated and brought in through a statutory process for some time. The actual areas to which SIL applies will have to remain the geographical area that is Sedgemoor District Council at present, and there's the additional complication that not all of the districts have SIL. So this will probably be one of those matters where it will be at least probably a number of years into a new authority before that will all be harmonised because of the processes that you have to go through. Moving on to the it's about the criteria for formal spending of SIL, and this is an area that we are very much currently working on. We are a little delayed, but we were charged with going back to basically during the autumn of coming up with a suggested approach. It's very much, we would class it as an interim approach, given that what we will be putting in place will have, well, potentially a lifespan of 18 months, but it may well be the bedrock of what goes into the unitary authority. But we are looking therefore at something that is reasonably practical and simple to bring into play. We've had an initial discussion with our policy working group. That was a couple of months ago. It's going back to our policy working group this Thursday, and there's also a draft paper which is circulating to management team. So this is very much sort of some of our emerging ideas in it. So I'll put a slide up which just expands a little bit on the suggestions that I set out in the actual report and just talk you through some of our thoughts, and it'll be interesting to you know, to have some feedback from yourselves. So with a bit of luck, let's as I say, you'll be really pleased. This literally is a 2-slide presentation. So I'm not sure. Is there a slide up? Let me just.
There is a slide up, yeah.
Brilliant. So, as I say, this is very much sort of work in progress, and it reflects some of our initial discussions about having what we felt was a sort of a tiered approach to some SIL expenditure. Very much has been driven by, we have had 1 or 2 requests for SIL, and we did make, there was an award made to a scheme in Wedmore to deliver updated playing fields, and that effectively levered in. It was a request for, I think in the end, £30,000 from the SIL pot, but it levered in around £240,000 of match funding. But stimulated by that, it's like, well, we need to have a structured approach. And at the moment, our sort of emerging ideas are perhaps to have a situation where small shall we say, small amounts of SIL could be delegated effectively to the Assistant Director for Inward Investment and Growth, and but to be considered by management team in first instance. So bear in mind, this is just ideas, but we're suggesting perhaps awards of up to say £20,000. We want to have something where we could process and potentially make these decisions quite quickly for small amounts. In terms of slightly more significant requests, following the discussion we had certainly at the policy group, and not wanting to reinvent processes, we are wondering or considering whether the existing grants award subcommittee could have a role to play in making those moderate size requests. So grants of up to £50,000. So again, the process would be considered by our management team and then to small grants subcommittee, and they would make a decision on those, and very much in line with how they currently consider grants. Obviously, there would need to be amendments to include an element of SIL within their delegated authority. And then more substantial decisions, we're suggesting the over 50,000. Effectively, this would be something to be considered. It would be considered by grants subcommittee, but it would actually be a recommendation then to executive, and executive would be the decision-making body for those more substantial grants. That the logic behind there is the larger awards, if we get any requests for that in the interim, are very much about delivering the strategic infrastructure, so the clear council priorities, whereas the smaller grants are effectively looking at some of the local parish scale projects. What we've emphasised, and in the wider report we emphasise, is that the starting point for smaller schemes should be the parish council or town council meaningful proportion, and our SIL pot is fundamentally about delivering the strategic growth infrastructure necessary, so the large road schemes, titled the barrier scheme, for example, large schemes for open space. In terms of this is the only other slide. So I updated just in terms of those figures, but in terms of that prioritisation, therefore, of use of SIL receipts, we're still suggesting the 20% for the Bridgewater barrier, which was a commitment when we moved from the previous tariff system. What we are suggesting is that I mentioned the current 5% admin pot, which actually equates to quite a significant amount of money, £186,000. That hasn't as yet been used for administrating SIL. And as you can understand, as we get more SIL in, that becomes a more significant element. It is anticipated going forward that the post, the SIL and Section 106 monitoring officer's salary will be paid out of that 5% administrative cost, but that certainly doesn't by any means, wouldn't use all of that funding. The suggestion is, in the first instance, is that we use that unspent 5% admin and repurpose it, as it says, for a small local infrastructure projects pot. So that would be a pot of money which those smaller bids actually going up to 50,000 could come out of in the first instance. So that wouldn't mean we're making inroads into the substantive unallocated amount of SIL which is used for delivering the major projects. And I suppose just a final point in terms of some of the ideas we're thinking about in terms of that governance. In terms of applications for SIL funding, we feel it's important that they do align with local plan and other priorities. Sometimes those priorities are set out in neighbourhood plans, which is a really good place if the town or parish council has one. We would be looking for evidence in terms of the certainty of delivery, and in terms of funding, again, it's something to discuss further, but we're currently suggesting that we feel that the sill should be perhaps 50% maximum of any match funding. Again, emphasising that the first port, this is for the smaller schemes, the first port of call really should be the town and parish meaningful proportion and or other fundraising, and that dipping into the sill pot here should, it's probably not quite right to say last resort, but shouldn't be the first port of call. You should be demonstrating that you've looked at all alternative opportunities for funding, and part of the case when you're making your application would be to demonstrate how much match funding bringing in some additional sill would allow. And just as a final point, it's really important that the context of this is, 2,300,000 unallocated sill and maybe 186,000 which we could repurpose. We have to be realistic. It's still a drop in the ocean in terms of our sill requirements. Out of that, if we had 1 or 2 requests, for example, for education funding, that would take all of that amount in one go. Some of our other schemes in terms of strategic flood defences of Burnham and Highbridge, £1 million scheme there, you could find £500,000 of your sill going very quickly. So it's ultimately that's why we're very keen to, while supporting some of the smaller scale opportunities where possible, to really prioritise the main sill for those big projects which unlock the main amount of the sort of key development. So before picking up on any of the other points, I'll stop sharing the screen now. It'd be interesting, if there's any views of, as I say, what are very much emerging ideas, and they're certainly going to have further discussion as they go through policy working group, management team. And the idea is that in the new year, it's reasonably early in the new year, we'll take a paper through to executive to put this to put a mechanism in place.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'll take questions from members in a moment. Just to make a quick note, though, that Councillor Finneran, in sending his apologies, also had some issues. He was concerned of the lack of procedure in place so far. And he referred to a particular thing about the Cheddar Pavilion, which you may know detail about, why he was Sedgemoor declined the elements of meaningful proportion in relation to the Cheddar proposal. I don't know whether that's relevant to comment on now or not, but certainly with the move towards unitary, the need to keep projects local and to keep local input into that, and use rising power of towns and parishes, which is quite important, to preserve some form of localism. I would hope out of this. If you maybe just comment on those, then I'll go to Councillor Evans and Councillor Pearce, who've indicated, and Councillor Filmer, who've indicated speaking as well. Just want to respond to Councillor Finneran's points. Yes,
for Cheddar Pavilions, my understanding was that we did, in the end, it was done via loan. Whilst they were able to fund it out of the parish meaningful proportion, because there's a delay. There's a delay because SIL is only paid on commencement, no, on completion of development. So what was agreed was that the council would effectively forward fund the meaningful proportion and effectively reclaim it as development took place. So enable that, or it should have enabled that project to go forward. So that was using, I suppose that was, trying to be as supportive as possible, but ultimately they weren't requesting additional SIL, they just wanted forward funding out of it.
Okay, can I take members who've been in the order I saw them? Councillor Evans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation, Nick. Quite thought-provoking in terms of whether SIL is the right vehicle for delivering what sorts of infrastructure, because it seems quite strange to have on a list at the same time educational improvements, which is largely going to be improving capacity for our schools. So I think there are 2 new schools that I think are in, well, more than 2 new schools that are in the local plan. both at the sort of Skimmerton Lane sort of area development, Wilstock and Highbridge, and there may be more. I haven't actually read the local plan for at least 5 minutes, so I'm not quite sure whether there are any more lurking around. That would more than swallow up the amount of money there. And then I'm looking at the other headings, which are play facilities and active travel ideas, which are a lot smaller in terms of their scope. Is there any hope that this will be used to deliver anything apart from education, infrastructure, and the major projects that are on the list?
I think that's why the opportunity, shall we say, for suggesting that some smaller projects that we do effectively have a pot within that for smaller projects, which can be really important locally in terms of, and as I say, the key thing is often it can make the difference between a funding gap. There's going to be a debate, I suppose, between the amount of money that should be going to those smaller projects, but I'd go back to the point though that fundamentally, SIL, because it replaced Section 106 agreements initially, the situation has changed now. It is through community infrastructure levy that, education places is currently funded in most cases. Some large developments have to provide a school within that. And you're right, that if we had a claim, that would swallow it up potentially in one or two bites. The same with some of the, well, obviously the tidal barrier, takes 20% of the SIL but that is infrastructure which facilitates significant wider development. That's the difference. So its impact is probably town wide, in some cases district wide.
I think we all appreciate that the Bridgewater tidal barrier not only opens up potential development land, it also protects the largest town in the district from becoming Venice of Somerset, doesn't it? So we all appreciate the importance of that big project, but we're talking about statutory services that the council has to provide at school places versus services that we like to provide, play areas, and we have to produce the statutory services. So presumably we have some sort of communication from the Somerset County Council, the Education Authority, as to what their likely draw on these funds is, because we don't want to spend money that we statutorily have to spend on education on other projects in the meantime.
I mean, we have a good, really strong relationship with the county education team. So we actually have meetings every 6 weeks. So at least we're all appraised of what the situation is in terms of school capacity. And actually, fortunately, more recently, there's been a bit of a tailing off of in terms of roles. So there's not quite such the urgency to bring forward some of the additional investment. I suppose the other thing to bear in mind is the figure, the 2.3 million is what helpfully sits in an account at the moment. It's a different calculation which we would be able to, which we would have in terms of what will have been secured, but it's just that development hasn't yet started. So there will be a substantial, but that is the difficulty, that there's quite a lag between getting your community infrastructure levy collected and possibly when it needs to be spent. And it's why really you need a good, if someone could give you a forward fund of £20 million to start you off, then community infrastructure levy continuously then tops that up. But when you're starting with zero, you're having to save up already 6 years, and we've got £2.5 million. So it is exponential. It is going up quicker. But
okay, and then the third question, I see the infrastructure list that you've helpfully put into the report. With a particular project in mind, I'm looking through it that wouldn't fit any of those headings except by careful manipulation or fiddling. Is that list possible to be amended or rewritten or added to, or is it chiseled in tablets of stone somewhere?
Through this process, there is certainly an opportunity, and I think actually it's an important opportunity to review and confirm infrastructure priorities. The list was based on the infrastructure delivery plan, so that was part of the evidence base for the local plan. So I suppose what we'd be looking at is if there was evidence of, you know, something which has increased in priority, that could be considered, and if it doesn't sit within those broad headings. I mean, the one thing which we are aware of, which has emerged more recently, has been around healthcare, but slightly independent of this process, we're introducing a technical note which sets out how contributions to healthcare, particularly primary, so this is local doctor surgeries, can, you know, there's a calculator which says how much per dwelling would be expected, and that is linked to another local plan policy. So that sits in addition to SIL, because healthcare wasn't on this list. So we do have a mechanism for collecting appropriate contributions towards doctor surgeries for physical buildings, not the revenue costs, though.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick.
Could I bring in Councillor Pearce?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Nick, for your timely update. And it's good to know that progress is being made. My couple of questions. One question is how you will be communicating once a decision is made about release of the funds. And the point I want to pick up, as I mentioned in my personal interest, I have an interest in the Meads. And the supplementary planning document for that was passed in 2009 with an expectation there would be certain features and access around the site, none of which exists in 2021. So given that that is a Sedgemoor project, in terms of prioritisation, what will be the criteria for prioritising? I'm just slightly worried, although I'm sure there will be lots of worthy schemes coming through. Some of them are actually the responsibility of other organisations. So it's just knowing how that all fits into the grand scheme of things and priority-wise, and making sure that those of us that are working with officers on Sedgemoor on schemes like the Meads, which are actually mentioned in the in Appendix B, that they'll be fully up to speed so that they can help members of the public to progress those schemes. Thank you.
I mean, in terms of the Meads, fairly familiar with it, and there's actually some works going on at the moment. I think, hopefully. I mean, the benefit.
Sorry to interrupt, Nick. It is, but that's funded by Blue Heritage, led by Wildfowl, Wetlands and Wildfowl Trust.
But I think that's an example where, actually, to date, there've been various reasons why it might have taken this stage, but at the moment, you know, there's been success in securing funding from other sources, and maybe continued success in securing funding from other sources. If that means the Meads can continue to be delivered now, and with the momentum I think that's now started, without needing to call upon the SIL receipts, that's an ideal situation. But equally, in terms of prioritisation, actually something like the Meads, where you can demonstrate a substantial amount of match funding, means that you might be saying, well, we need X amount of SIL, because that's bringing in 4 times that amount of money, because it's making a funding gap. And that will be the process. In terms of the detail, I think the value for money, the additional monies that it unlocks, will be a really important consideration. It's about making every pound work as hard as you can. And I think you mentioned about how we communicated, and I think, you know, my own view is we do need to be quite cautious, particularly around the opportunities for smaller awards. It is about supporting schemes when they come forward, but we need to balance that, as I say all the time, thinking, you know, the more that goes out for small local schemes, they are important, but if they can be funded other ways, that's the starting point. Because I don't think it will be something about saying there is now X, you know, £100,000 available from SIL, get your applications in now. I think we will update and say that there are opportunities, and this is a mechanism and the criteria. But just I think it's important that we have a slight note of of caution, shall we say. This isn't you know, but it will be important to set out, I think, the criteria in the detail as well, talking about how we would be expecting other sources of funding, and this to be, again, this to be match funding. But as it goes through to executive early in the new year, we'll have fleshed out the details a little bit more.
Okay, Councillor Filmer.
Thank you very much. A couple of my questions have already been addressed by other questions and also the presentation. But one thing I wanted to ask, particularly concerned me, was the 20,000 that was in the report initially, and you've now explained that there's the 50 with the involvement of the grants committee, which I think having the grants involved is an excellent step forward. Just wanted to ask, in all of the gateways that came to that money being allocated, it started off going through management team. So does that mean that management team in effect have a veto on anything progressing, or would they just make a recommendation that the recommendation may not be positive, but potentially the grants committee could make a decision against that recommendation? Because otherwise it looks like management team get to decide what even makes it through the starting gates.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I don't think it would be correct, certainly for the grants committee level, that that would mean something wasn't considered by that process, because that's considering in particular the local circumstances, and brings in, you know, local democratic element into it. And it may well be, to be honest, it may well be that when we discuss it with management team, they will say, to be honest, we only are interested in the big awards which are going to executive, and I think that's probably would be the preference. That it may have a slight role in the delegated if we retain that. And one option, we could have an option to say there's no delegation, that there's any amount up to 50,000 goes through grants committee. That is another way of looking at it. I think we felt that for those smaller amounts, sometimes being able to make almost a very quick decision on a you know, a relatively small amount, large for a local community, but had some advantages rather than it having to go through that process. So, but yeah, I think we could, in our discussion, it's going to it should go to management team on Thursday week. It's out for consultation, and I think we'll make that point actually, that it would be for, shall we say, for information. Anything that's going to grants committee goes to management team for information only.
That's helpful, thank you, Nick. Also, you mentioned within there that there's this element of match funding, and again, would like some clarity as to what match funding means. Does that mean that at least 50% has to be found from somewhere else, or could it be maybe 20% from somewhere else and 80% still if that was something grants committee felt was appropriate?
I think like all these things, I think it's really good to have a starting point and an expectation. Equally, there should always be, shall we say, even by exception, some opportunity, so that the particular local circumstances of the project and actually the amounts that we're talking about could be considered. So I'm not a great fan of having an absolute line in the sand, because otherwise what you end up doing is discussing why it's 50% and not 60% or 40%, whereas some of this discussion needs to be about the merits of the project. It could be something that's been long-standing, really needed, and an opportunity to bring it forward. So I think, I mean, I'm making a note there. I think we'd want to have an indication, but would allow some flexibility, or would be suggesting that ultimately the grants committee could award a higher amount. At the moment, I think I'm right. When I looked last time for small grants, they did award up to 80%. I think so. You know, you could have that as a, you know, that there could be some flexibility depending on where it's the project up to that amount.
Thank you. And my final comment was really just to say welcome what's come forward from this. As you know, I've, like Councillor Finner and others, we've been nagging for some time to get this in place, and particularly with the unitary coming forward, I think it's even more critical that we get this in place, so that this could be the benchmark for the rest of the county, potentially with Section 106. So thank you for getting this forward, and hopefully we can get it now very quickly on the books.
And I would say, whilst I'm here, that my colleague Joe Manley, who's in our team, has done a huge amount of work on this as well, getting it forward. But I said I did say she didn't need to come along this afternoon.
Okay, can I just check if any other members wish to ask any questions at this point? No? In which case, the purpose of this meeting was to update us on where we were. Nick has pointed out that they're finally fleshing out where the procedures are going to end up, which will be quite soon determined. So we'll note the item today, and he'll have taken on board, as he mentioned several times, comments that members made today. Okay, is that okay with everybody? Yep. Thank you very much, Nick, for your time then, and we'll move on to the next item of business. Okay. So next item is the Holmes and Sedgemoor report into gas and fire safety. We've got two people with us today that can answer any questions from us. That's Mr. Chisnell, who's the compliance manager at Holmes and Sedgemoor. We've got Nigel Osborne, who can answer anything from a legal point of view relating to that. Does either of you wish to add anything to your report to start with? Otherwise, we'll go straight to questions.
Not from me, thank you.
No, and nothing from Mr. Osborne.
Nothing from me.
So, members, you'll have read that report. It's something that members have asked to bring forward before to make sure that we're on top of this situation at Holmes and Sedgemoor are. Are there any questions that members would like to ask at this point? I see no indication of any members wishing to ask any questions, which to my mind signifies a report which people are happy with. And this could therefore be possibly the shortest scrutiny item ever until Councillor Revens has put his hand up, which is a good thing. Councillor Revens.
I didn't want to just disappoint Councillor Smedley. I could feel that the excitement in your voice that's hoping we'd have a question. I note that in regard of Westfield House, a growth bid has been submitted to Sedgemoor to undertake a scan of the building. I was wondering whether we could have an update on where that is and how soon we might see that taking place. Thank you.
Councillor Evans, we've approached our repairs and maintenance contractor MD to provide that cost to us, that quotation. That's still being formulated at the moment. We haven't received the final draft, but I'll be sure to chase it up for you and give you a response.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Pearce has joined the list of questionnaires.
Thank you. My question is on exactly the same topic, but I probably should know, but I don't know what a 3D scan is. So I wonder if you could just tell me a bit more about that, please.
So from the findings of the Grenfell Tower disaster, there's a recommendation from the Hackett report where any taller blocks that we have would have a 3D scan available next to the fire panel in the lobby area for the fire brigade. So previously, when they've gone to buildings they're not familiar with, they know the building structure on the outside, but then there may be chambers or fire breaks which they're not aware of, and this 3D scan will give them confidence they'll know exactly their way through the building.
Okay, any more members wish to ask any questions? There comes none, and therefore I would suggest thank you very much for your reports today and coming to committee with those. It's good that we keep an update on these and have full reports which members are satisfied with, which shows that we're all on top of the situation and happy with measures being taken. So thank you very much for attending today, and we can therefore move on to note the report and move on to the next item of business, which is the COVID update. And we have with us today Martin Stoyles, who is, I think, Civil Contingencies Manager, and I think Sarah Dowden's with us. So I dare say Mr. Stoyles will say a few words in advance of the topic. Mr. Stoyles, you with us?
Yeah, good afternoon. Yeah, I'd like to briefly update you on the current COVID situation in Somerset and Sedgemoor, and also report to you on the new regulations coming out in response to the new Omicron variant of COVID. Over the last month, the case numbers in Somerset have remained fairly high but stable between 400 and 450 per 100,000. population, which has generally reflected the UK case numbers, which today are at 439.5 per 100,000. Sedgemoor case numbers today are reported at 418 per 100,000, compared to Somerset at 435 per 100,000. So we fared slightly better than Mendip and South Somerset over the last month, where numbers have been consistently higher, although numbers in Somerset West and Taunton have been a bit lower. The R rate across the southwest is stable at 0.9 to 1.1, which is similar to the England R rate at 1 to 1.1. Hospital patients across the two trusts in Somerset have been steadily decreasing since mid-November, from about 90 in total, going down to 40, but over the last week have risen to just under 50, and there have been 12 deaths over the last reporting period. 95.5% of the Somerset over 18 population have had at least one vaccine, and 92.3% have had 2 vaccinations. Approximately 76% of 16 to 17-year-olds and just over 50% of 12 to 15-year-olds have had their single dose vaccine. And there's no figures on the numbers in Somerset who have had their booster jabs yet. In terms of the new Omicron variant, England's COVID rules are being strengthened in response to concerns over the variant, which was originally identified in South Africa. 6 cases of the new variant have been identified in Scotland, some of which have no travel history and have likely been caught in the community. There's a further 3 cases in England, bringing the total to 9 in the UK altogether. It's currently not known if the new variant is able to evade the vaccine, causes more severe disease, or is more transmissible, but this information will be coming out over the next few weeks. The new UK measures in response to the new variant include, from Tuesday, face coverings will once again be compulsory in shops and on public transport. All contacts of suspected Omicron cases will be required to self-isolate for 10 days, which is regardless of a person's vaccination status. Anyone entering the UK will require a PCR test by the end of the 2nd day after their arrival, and will need to self-isolate until they have a negative result. The change will be brought in as soon as possible following the agreement with other UK nations. The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunization, that's the JCVI, the UK's vaccine advisory body, will consider giving the booster vaccine to as wide a group as possible. It will also reduce the gap between the 2nd dose and booster. In addition, from today, all children in secondary schools will be required to wear face coverings in communal areas. The police, including civil and transport, will once again have the enforcement role with regards to face coverings, and additional fines will be introduced. PCR testing may be problematic, as it's likely that there will be significant delays in people receiving their PCR test results, which can mean an extended period of self-isolation for those affected. Obviously, you can't use the NHS PCR testing facility, which is something to bear in mind if any of you have plans to travel abroad. In terms of local contingencies, there are proposals to set up a new local COVID testing station at the old Bridgewater Hospital car park by Somerset County Council Public Health, which is likely to happen over the next week or 2. And that will be a valuable resource for Bridgewater over the winter period. In terms of officer contingency, we still have our COVID support officer, Richard Noakes, but no longer have the Somerset-wide COVID wardens. The last one left last week. I'm due to attend a COVID meeting with County Public Health tomorrow afternoon and discuss any comms that we need to be doing around the new variant and the regulations to be introduced. And that's my report, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you for that. The new variant's obviously quite new news. All the more reason we should be helping vaccinate the world and not sticking local on that one. But any questions from around the panel, around the committee today on the situation? I see Councillor Filmer.
couple of ones, if I could. The first one is related to what you just updated us on. In terms of the booster jabs, is there any reason why there's no update on the figures? Because we sort of had almost daily updates on the other 2 rollouts of the 2 jabs, and then there's been no news about the boosters at all. So is there a reason why we're not getting that information?
I'm not sure about that, but I will ask at the Somerset County meeting tomorrow, public health meeting tomorrow, because they put the figures out, and I know figures go out UK wide in terms of booster jabs. So yeah, I've wondered as well why those figures aren't available, but I will ask that question.
Okay, and the other question was more relating to the return to the office. Brian, do you want to do that now, or
Yes. Yeah.
okay? Just really wanted to ask what the plans are at the moment for getting back into sort of Bridgewater House, particularly relating to committee meetings. As you know, wearing another hat, I'm chairman of the development committee. We're currently using the canal side, which has some issues in relation to particularly the broadcasting of meetings and sound issues. So just wondered when the likelihood was we might be back in Bridgewater House, and whether or not the air conditioning units that we have in Bridgewater House actually have filters in them to help with taking out things from the air that you don't want to have in it. So just wanted to check whether that was something that can actually be used to help us with the ventilation side.
Yeah, I know that Joe Coles, who's the corporate health and safety advisor, is looking into ventilation, and we have some CO2 monitors around the building just to see if there's any dead spots of air not moving around the building. So, you know, we're aware of those. She's away at the moment, but back on Wednesday. So I need to speak to her about whether she has any results from those surveys carried out. In terms of generally staff moving back into the building, I think this week was the week that more staff were due back and have probably gone back. Although obviously the new variant may have an effect at some point, but at the moment, until we know more about it, I think the general movement is for more people to return to work. But I will try and find out about those committee meetings in terms of the ventilation requirements, because I know that's a concern.
Thank you.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chair. My question was around accessibility or availability for the booster in Sedgemoor and particularly Bridgewater. And I, like many, have booked to go to Taunton because there just hasn't been anywhere available in Bridgewater. And I know there was a walk-in centre at the weekend, but it seems strange when I look on the website that there are, say, 3 venues in Minehead with a population of about 6,000 and no availability in Bridgewater with a population of around 46,000. And I just wondered if you were aware, and I know it's not Sedgemoor's responsibility this, to be sort of taking more of a strategic view around the county so that people have access to it, because not everybody can get into a car and head to the next town.
That's a very good point, and I'm aware of that. And yeah, I had to travel quite some way to get my booster vaccination the other day. And they tend to come up sporadically. So I think if you go through the NHS website and look for a local vaccination centre, they can pop up occasionally and then they disappear again. So I think it's certainly a fair question to ask public health what the strategic plans are with booster sites, because they're not always the same sites as the vaccination sites. They're a separate entity altogether, because they're only allowed to have either the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine there. So they don't fit in necessarily with the normal initial and second dose of vaccination. So yeah, that's certainly another question I can ask, but I can't guarantee a suitable answer.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Revens, you had your hand up, but it's gone down. Was it a legacy hand, or was your question been accidentally answered?
It was very similar to Bob's question, and that meant that the answer was forthcoming by the end of the response.
That's brilliant. Then I noticed Councillor Lilly's hand similarly.
Yeah, same situation. Bob covered it really, and also I thought what Kath asked was really interesting actually about the availability in Bridgewater. But yeah, I'm satisfied with that as well. Thank you.
Okay, so I think there's nobody else indicating that they wish to ask any questions then. So thank you very much for your presentation today, and we'll note the news, what's happening over the next few weeks with the new, whatever it's called, omnipresent virus, or whatever it is, and we'll move on. Thank you very much. So let's just now move on to the last item of today's agenda, which is ongoing workload, isn't it? So I'll hand over to Rose on this one.
Thank you, Chair. So just to give a bit of an update, following on from the last committee, we've now put together some of the information into a work programme. So the next committee is the joint one in January, looking at the high-level budget strategy. At the moment, we've sort of thought it might be a best approach to leave that as a single item, particularly looking into some of the topics of importance, such as the implications on the budget from the COVID-19 response and recovery, and the local government reorganisation, and how that factors into the budget. In February, with back to the Corporate Scrutiny Committee, we were looking at having an update on gravity, and then also just obviously the full council meeting next week will be hearing about the upcoming Somerset-wide Joint Scrutiny Committee arrangements as well, going to full council. Also in the agenda, I have put in the upcoming key decisions, just to give a sort of bit of information on what is coming up. And then I think just sort of since in the last couple of months, there have been quite a few discussions looking at where we can prioritise, where scrutiny can have a role moving forward in this sort of transitional period. So we have been sort of talking about prioritising, looking at topics that maintain services, look at economic and community recovery, and transitioning to the new council in the best position possible. So we with community scrutiny last week, we did say about that with any topics that anybody might have an idea for, could we potentially look at, to contact myself, and then I can discuss it with the chairman and officers on where we can add value, also being mindful of not creating any new pieces of work, or where there might be resources that are being redirected with the local government reorganisation, but finding a way to add value to projects or work that is already ongoing. So yes, that was just a bit of an update really. Hopefully over the next sort of couple of months there might be sort of more information that might come out as to where scrutiny can have a role, but as I said, at the moment it seems to be trying to find opportunities to add value, and to help the services hand over to the new position, to the new council in the best position possible.
Okay, thank you for that. Clearly our role as this scrutiny committee isn't to scrutinise the unitary situation, because they set up a specific county-wide scrutiny body for that. Although the composition of that is under question, I'd like to know how that fits into the democratic processes of Sedgemoor. That's also a secondary question that Councillor Finneran sent in his email to everybody. He was a bit concerned at how the balances were worked out, and I've also sent numerous variants of mathematical formulas around the county to try to see how it could be balanced in different ways. So just to make sure that it falls through the democratic processes, and that's explained at some point, because it will of course be scrutiny members who are expected to participate in that committee coming on, and it has to be agreed across the council in some strange 100% or nothing variant as well. Any other members want to ask any questions regarding the workload, or suggest that that might be enough for us, or have some other ideas? Councillor Filmer.
It was just one thing. Wanted to ask if under the gravity one in February, there's no specific mention of the local development order within the topics that are going to be raised, and I just wonder whether that ought to be in there as an explanation to for us all to get a better understanding as to what that does and what it allows us to do in the future or not.
Yeah, that's fine. That's something I can add into it there. So yes, I think there's just a few points there that we sort of tried to put together, but that we'd relook at nearer the time, so we can make sure that that's included. It sounds useful.
Okay, and Councillor Revens.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian. First of all, I'm sure that the gravity item will go down well. And secondly, could we just clarify what it is we can and can't comment on as a scrutiny committee with regards to LGR? Because so much of what we will be doing over the next 18 months will be impacted by LGR. If we can't comment on anything because it might run into the territory of LGR, then we'll end up having some fairly boring agendas. So I think some terms of reference as to what we can and can't do would be really helpful.
And I think that there is work going on, like with the business as usual, that there may be things that come out of that which will say what we should and shouldn't be getting involved in. I don't think it's not particularly an issue if it's something that comes up as part of a topic, or if that it's commented on, but it's just more so not getting involved in topics where we can't add value if it is something that is being worked at under a work stream. So sort of, for example, if it was something like to look at all to do an audit of all of the community assets that the council has, that would be something that would be currently being looked at under a work stream and would already be ongoing through that. So it would be sort of trying not to duplicate work where there may be things that are going on within the work streams of LGR. But it is something that there should be in the next couple of months, perhaps sort of in the next few weeks, there should be more information coming out, and that's particularly something that I would quite like to, have a proper list of where we can and can't get involved in and what we can and can't do, because at the moment it isn't 100% clear, and I do get that, but it's mostly just sort of trying not to duplicate work and get involved in topics where we may not be able to have an impact because of what's going on with LGR.
So the essential criteria is not to duplicate work streams. We therefore need to know what the work streams are so we don't duplicate them. So that kind of an audit would be useful, or a monitor would be useful for us in future. In terms of the next couple of meetings, though, what Rose has said with Councillor Filmer's addition onto that, it seems reasonable to everybody with the workload. And if we can get that non-duplicated work stream fitted in there somehow, then we might be able to know whether we're treading on other people's toes or whether we're adding value. And of course, there's no particular criterion for adding value, so I'm sure we can decide that we add value, whatever we say. So
is there any criteria for treading on toes?
That's the one. Yeah, so there's plenty of toes to stand on. Anyway, not as many as we'd have liked. But anybody else got any more points they'd like to raise with Rose before she goes away and takes us forward? Seems to me like none. Therefore, I suspect, I'm pretty sure about it, because there's not an item 10, that we're at the end of the agenda for today. So thank you all very much for attending, and I'm pretty sure I'm about to declare this meeting closed, and I just have done. Thank you.